with something crazy that OKR would stand for? Somebody said me.
I don't know, Regina. I gotta see if they're that creative. Let's challenge them. Let me see if they come up with really cool things.
Yeah, okay results is good.
That's
We'll
cool.
take okay results.
Okay. Anybody else? Only, what was the other one?
Only known results.
Yeah.
Only
Obvious
known
known.
results.
Only know
Obvious known realities.
Only known realities.
that's pretty
funny.
cool. That's pretty cool. All right, so I'm just gonna pass this over to Larry. I know, Larry, I know that Nelu has a couple of polls that
Yep.
she's also created for you,
Yep,
but go
yep.
ahead and kick us off, Larry.
Yep. So thank you. Perfect. We're actually going to start right with the polls just to get a good sense. There's 3 quick questions. Want to get a sense for, well, if you want to go ahead and put them up real quick, and then I'll share my screen with the deck for tonight. So are you going to put that up now? Oh, there we go.
There we go. So let me share that again. Okay. Real quick. And I think it's not showing up on my side. Let me see if it's
There, it's
free on
coming
your
through.
side.
I'm seeing some come through. Looks like we got a handful of coaches, Scrum Masters. Here we go. Yeah. Okay. Everybody get a chance to chime in. So we don't have any OKR coaches amongst you. Maybe we'll create some tonight.
Yes.
Okay, good. PMO folks interested in this stuff for sure. The stuff we're going to cover. All of you will be interested. Anybody interested in Agile, which all of you are, obviously Agile Meetup here, you're going to love understanding what we can do with OKRs as a complement to Agile. So, okay, good. Thanks. Appreciate that. Do you want to put the next one up?
Yes, absolutely.
Okay.
Let me go ahead.
These
and
ones are
share
going to
that.
be about your actual roles. Just, I mean, your actual experience with OKRs. Just get a sense for, I know some of you were shaking your head and asking what OKR stood for a minute ago. It's okay.
Okay, so here it is.
There we go.
I'm gonna reshare the link in case you're joining.
Okay, not currently. Okay, I've heard about them. A lot of you haven't worked with them yet. Okay, no problem. And some of you have not heard of them at all. Not heard of them at all. Okay, you'll find them valuable. I promise you. You may have. We're probably gonna feel like we're talking more Agile than you think. So, okay, it looks like a little bit more than half have heard of them, but have not worked with them. So, okay, and we've got a handful of experts. So join me in the conversation tonight. Perfect. This is helpful. Okay, this is the last one. Okay. Okay, there's our opportunity, everyone. That column, we haven't used them yet. %25% plan to implement them. That's good. That's good. This will be valuable for you. This will be very valuable. All right, Nilu, if you want, we can switch over and I'll share my screen.
Yes, sir.
And let me do this. All right, I'm gonna start in a like where you might not really expect the conversation on OKRs to start, but I'm gonna start there anyway, because there are real systemic problems to solve in organizations, like real legitimate problems. And OKRs as a solution needs to align really with the right fixes in an organization. So OKRs are not intended to be, just something else we do to kind of like set goals, if you will. Let me, for those of you who are brand new to OKRs, I'm gonna just give you the succinct. So it stands for objectives and key results, okay? People will understand them as a two parts to them. The objective statement, and we're gonna talk more about this a little bit later. There's an objective statement, and then there's a set of key results. The objective statement, it sets the direction of what we want to accomplish. What are we trying to achieve? What's the outcome? What's the business outcome we're trying to achieve? And then the key results underneath it are measurable outcomes that tell us the success criteria for our objective. So an eloquent way to write OKRs sometimes is to start with your statement of, we want to become the greatest, agile transformation company in North America, as measured by, and then you would get into your key results. Maybe we win X number of new clients, or maybe we get clients of a certain size, or there might be other ways to describe that, or might be just it might be growth margins, financial growth margins that we hit, right? Those would be the pointers to the success of the objective. Okay, so that's what they are, kind of in a nutshell. What I didn't tell you though is that OKRs are also a framework, and that's the part why we would have a discussion this evening about implementing OKRs. Because if it was just as simple as what I described to you, that you make a statement of what you want to achieve as an objective, and then you set a number of key results that describe success, that seems pretty straightforward. Okay, that seems pretty straightforward. But if it were just that simple, then we probably wouldn't fill an entire meetup or 2-day courses with information on OKRs, nor would we be writing books. So there's a lot going on there. And that's what I want to introduce to all of you tonight, is the depth of OKRs, and so that you can understand how OKRs, like Agile, can be transformative to organizations. That's what we're talking about. They're powerful, powerful capabilities to help us establish and align on what it is we're trying to achieve. And that's where the power of OKR starts to come in. We're going to get to that, okay? So where we're going to start, though, is we're going to start by looking at two conditions in organizations that I'm sharing with you only for the purpose of you to do two things. One, look for symptoms of this in your own organizations, okay? And two, understand these as the fundamental things we're trying to fix with OKRs, okay? So this first thing that I'm sharing with you, and these would be like our why for OKRs, is a study that was done by MIT Sloan Business Review. They did it in 2018. And the title of this slide was called No One Knows Your Strategy. So if you were to Google No One Knows Your Strategy, you'd end up finding this article out there that describes this. And it's really interesting. What this found is, it found that when asked, the survey ask 3 questions of different levels of the organization. Not 3 questions, they asked 1 question. What are your 3 top priorities in your organization? That was the only question that was asked. When asked of the senior leaders, only 51% could accurately describe the top 3 priorities in the organization. Half of the senior executives could describe it. And by the time you got down to what they describe as frontline leads, you're down to 13%. So these are, when we have a decay rate of clarity or a decay rate of understanding in organizations like this, this is why people often don't really associate purpose with the work in organizations, because they don't know how it ties up to broader goals that the organization is trying to achieve. It's all just work, and it's a lot of work, right? A lot of work. So this is setting a foundation that alignment in organizations can go a long way to help, solve some of the bigger systemic problems that we have in organizations. So this is one thing that I want you to kind of think about. Okay, big problem to solve. The second one is something that you all would already be familiar with in general, which is our levels of engagement that we have in organizations and levels of active disengagement. We're trying to help create purpose in organizations. We need to drive purpose because people, when they have a purpose to the work that they're doing, engagement goes up. Okay, so we've got alignment issues and engagement issues, which are systemic in organizations, which are causing numbers like these to happen. And when we have the combination of those two, we end up with high politics and slow growth. When we have the combination of those two, which is lack of clarity on what we're trying to achieve and low engagement from the people that could really do something about it. And so we're trying to avoid these things. And so we look to Agile a lot of times to help fix problems like this. We don't often look at the problems quite like through this lens, because when we're boots on the ground, the problems we're trying to fix is firefighting, you know, having multiple priority one things that we're trying to do, you know, things, you know, work shifting and changing and stopping and starting over here. And, you know, there's like this constant churn and everybody's trying to understand, but really that churn is related to an overall lack of clarity on what we're trying to get done. Okay. So now what do we do about it? Okay. So what has been offered, and this is where I'm going to start to get into describing almost some change management elements of getting OKRs adopted in an organization. And this is where we have to look at some of the dysfunction that happens in organizations and our willingness to run with lack of clarity. I'm going to build on that story a little bit. Okay, so we've got real issues in organizations we need to fix. We have things that can help. OKRs are one. So in 2018, John Doerr, who is an investor from Silicon Valley, he was an early investor with Google, and he learned OKRs from Intel in the 70s by Andy Grove, who's considered kind of the grandfather of OKRs. Andy Grove, who was one of the founders of Intel, okay? So John Doerr now brings them to Google, and Google's like a 15 people organization at the time. I think the actual number was 14. And so it was easy for them to adopt OKRs and organize around these objectives that they were trying to achieve, okay? The thing that you have to know at this point right here, because this is actually like a critical point, which is OKRs being positioned as this game-changing framework, you know, for companies like Google. It's different for a company like Google that picks up OKRs as a 14-person startup versus Dell. Crystal's from Dell. Big organization. I'm sure many of you are from big organizations, large financial institutions that have been around for 100 years. You know, big insurance companies have been around where they've got, you know, tens of thousands of employees and they've got hardened processes around deep annual planning and how all that stuff is. And that's the stuff we fight from the Agile perspective, right? When you're a 100-year-old organization that has mature processes around annual planning and all of those things, and adopting OKRs is a completely different animal altogether, okay? And that's a key takeaway that I want you to get from tonight, because when it comes to trying to get OKRs, you're going to run into many of the same challenges that you have with Agile, because once we get into a little bit more of the framework aspect of OKRs, you're going to find that in the similar way to Agile, there's mindset shifts that have to happen. There's behavioral ways of working that have to change. There's new routines and patterns that have to be established in terms of how we work and when we set our goals versus our initiatives. So there's a lot that changes, okay? And so that's something I want you to start to appreciate as we step through this. Now, to those of you that are in that 25% that plan to adopt OKRs, this is the dangerous place that you're going to find yourself in, because in a similar way to those early days of even something as simple as Scrum, not to mention more complex frameworks like SAFe, when those were in the early days of being adopted, you saw all of the anti-patterns and struggles with organizations trying to adopt them. And we're seeing the same thing with OKRs. So let's talk a little bit about that. The first thing is we read the book, now let's go do OKRs. This is a really common tactic that people are trying to take to deploy OKRs, because if I think of OKRs as simply an objective and some measures to say how we're going to achieve it, and that's my understanding of it, and believe it or not, I'm telling you, we're working with an organization right now that's been doing OKRs for 2 years, struggling mightily because they moved into it too quickly and missed some real fundamental steps. So this pattern is common in organizations where we get the go do OKRs because something in our organization is broken. What's the something? We're not really sure, but tension's high, we're working late, we're working weekends, we got, so there's problems, right? So we can't just throw frameworks at problems blindly. That's number one point, okay? Because what happens is you get this response from the organization of going, okay, we got it, we're gonna go do OKRs, just like we're gonna go do Agile, we're gonna go do everything else. But that if we lay Agile on top of old ways of working underneath it, we're Agile in name only. That's what I want you to understand from an OKR framework perspective, is that you can suffer the same fate if you're not careful. Because even though we might want to jump on a bandwagon, if this is our understanding and this is how we feel, like we're scratching our head, like what really are OKRs, then what happens is we oversimplify our understanding, and we basically think of this right here as everything to do with OKRs. And it's what I described to you guys earlier, where you have this objective statement that describes this qualitative, just a description of a future state, something we're trying to accomplish. It should be aspirational. It should be something that takes us to, new levels of performance as an organization. You really want to stretch into objectives, so they're big goals, right? And the complement to these, and where you start to see a little bit of the guardrails built into the framework, is when we start to say, and you have a maximum of 3 to 5 OKRs. So you look at most organizations right now, and it's not uncommon where they've got lists of hundreds of projects. And now you're telling an organization to go do 3 to 5 objectives on what they want to achieve. It starts to, point to what we're trying to achieve, which is focus. Focus is a big part of what we're trying to achieve with OKRs. What are we trying to accomplish, and how will we know we accomplished it? That's the key result piece, okay? Now, if this represents our real understanding, and this represents the depth of understanding, let me tell you what actually happens in this scenario, which is super common. And any of you, this is where you really have to be careful, which is this. Most organizations that have that big, long backlist of initiatives that they're trying to attack for the year, if you will, when they write their OKRs, they will write their OKRs based on the projects, right? So our big list of projects must equal OKRs, right? That's not correct. So the reality is, when you adopt OKRs, initiatives that are in flight are actually a disservice to you. This is where OKRs really come into play, because OKRs, you want to decouple from our initiatives. We want it to be a pure statement of what it is that we're trying to accomplish. If it's not a statement of what we're trying to accomplish, and instead it encapsulates an initiative, then our success criteria for the objectives becomes attributes of project health, percentage complete, whether you're red, yellow, or green, you know, et cetera. You know, your burn down rate on budget. And this is an anti-pattern where I say we basically take OKRs and we make a mini project plans, and you don't want to fall into that trap. So if you're in an older organization that's been around a long time and has mature processes, the intercept point for trying to get OKRs in place is kind of your annual planning. Don't move too quick into initiatives. You know, that time of the year, get, you know, into, you know, late Q3, early Q4, and everybody starts to put together their initiatives, and they want funding for those initiatives. And that's what gets us this backlog of bloated project work. If it's really hard to do OKRs in the presence of defined initiative work. That's the takeaway I want you to get from that, okay? So when I'm coaching people on OKRs, and this is, you'll find this more difficult for some people than others, the real rub here and where the mindset shift is coming in with OKRs is an outcomes versus outputs mindset, okay? So many people will want to believe that because we deliver the project, we were successful. That the delivery of the project was success, but the real business outcome is lost. We will often ask ourselves in these organizations, are we doing the right work? Are we delivering value to our customers? And while we're asking those questions, we'll have people working nights and weekends on work that we can't even at times knowingly, for high degree of confidence, that it's the right work. Evidence of that is because we're asking the question, are we doing the right work, right? A contributing factor to that is what I call fluffy strategies. What's a fluffy strategy? A fluffy strategy is something like growth. It's a strategy that I could apply to any organization across the globe, and it would be as meaningful to that organization as any other. Fluffy strategies, we let executives off the hook by making meaningful, measurable strategies that we can overlay on an organization and have confidence that that organization can achieve that strategy. A fluffy strategy is a wish, it's a hope, and we could hope in, you know, come to the end of the year that we achieved it, but there's no guarantee. Okay, so now here's the good stuff. How are you guys doing so far? Is this landing? Is this landing? Are you good so far? Because we're going to get into some other parts. Any questions coming up? I'm kind of a soapboxy, preachy kind of guy. I'm sorry. I do good workshops though, I promise. But stuff like this where we have to get a lot in a short period of time, I soapbox a little bit. So you can slow me down though if you need to. Here's what I want to offer you guys though. This is where you're going to start seeing some scaled OKRs, thought leadership influencing the OKR framework, okay? Because we've defined a definition for the OKR framework that sets a tone, and it sets a meaningful tone. It says that OKRs are a strategy and alignment framework that seeks to ensure organizational clarity by creating an environment of common goals and shared commitments that propel the company forward. That's the OKR framework, okay? So it's not just about an objective statement and key results. There's an OKR cycle that goes along with it, and an OKR cycle that defines new operating rhythms for how we work toward outcomes versus outputs. We'll talk about this a little bit more. So use this as your definition of OKRs. Think of it like a framework. Think of it like the elements of Scrum, right? It's built upon a PDCA cycle, all of Agile, all of SAFe, all of everything. A plan, do, check, adjust cycle. That's what it's all about. The same thing is true for OKRs, okay? So now I want to get into some things like to help those of you that might be in coaching capacities or other, you know, where you might be find yourself at some point advising a company, even in the earliest stages of adopting OKRs. Okay. Again, this is where some thought leadership from scaled OKRs is coming into play because we're studying the competition and we see that too many OKR consultancies are ignoring Agile. So what does that do if they ignore Agile, if they just want to focus on OKRs? it can put competing frameworks in an organization unknowingly. And what does that result in? It results in Scrum teams doing OKRs. What does that look like? It looks like doing goals on top of goals because we don't realize Scrum, for example, is a goal setting framework. Every 2 weeks, that represents a goal, and we should articulate a goal that goes along with it, right? If we have those same teams doing OKRs, now we got goals on top of goals. So there is an integration aspect of things to think about with the OKR framework. Are we integrating with an existing framework? If so, there's a set of conditions that we have to consider. Or is it a standalone net new, and we might be that younger company that's kind of startup and just getting rolling, and we don't really have any management framework in place yet. We just do what the boss says. The leader of the company, entrepreneur, and in which case you're just doing OKRs. You could do that. You could do that. That would work great. But what you wouldn't want to do is overlay OKRs on something that has already established rhythms behind it, like SAFe or Agile or something like that. So this is an important thing to know.
Hey, Larry, there's 2 questions in the chat. Are you ready for any?
I can take a question.
So bring them. You mentioned in the chat, is there a common set of goals, good or relevant for all groups or departments in an organization, maybe leading to a force fit? Question mark. Bring him, please provide some clarity if you need.
Yeah, okay, so is a common set of goals good, relevant for the entire, like an entire organization? Maybe, so Brigham, can you kind of put some color on that for me a little bit? Help me understand the question just a little bit more.
Yeah, no, I'm just wondering, are the 1,000 flowers blooming all red with a certain white stripe? I mean, that's alignment. But maybe there's things that all these things are having to align to where, gosh, they should be doing something else. So I'm just curious.
It's fair. I'll give you the kind of the quick answer on that. And it's a heads up question to be thinking about. When you are coaching an organization on creating a set of OKRs that are kind of represent the top of a line of business, or maybe the top of the company, you do walk them through like a people, process, customer, growth. You walk them through a spectrum of things to consider, so that we don't come up with like OKRs that are just one-dimensional, because that'll happen. So you want them to, like, for example, it's not uncommon for companies adopting OKRs to have an OKR for the adoption of OKRs. So it's not intended that the common set of goals is dictated to everybody. The way OKRs, when done right, is you do establish a set 3 to 5 goals at either the top of a line of business or the top of the company, and those then are allowed to influence the next level down set of OKRs. That's the alignment piece that comes in. It's when you cascade the OKRs down a level or 2, and it's not a hard cascade where one level's like KR, for example, becomes the next level's objective. That would be a incorrect implementation of a cascaded set of OKRs. But so where you start to not, like, the common goals that we're talking about here would be for each group that's working toward the goals that they're trying to achieve. I don't know if that answered the question or not. We'll get a little bit further and we can come back to that one if it didn't answer the question. And then user stories be framed as OKRs. No, not really. You don't really want to use the OKR format for user stories. Here's what I'll just tell you guys. Like, when I get a question like that, it's important that you don't like have Agile on the brain and then think that OKRs somehow fit in it. And you're looking for ways to like fit OKRs into Agile. Bad mistake. I'll just say it like that. I don't mean to, knock the question. It's a fine question to ask. I've had the question asked a number of times. what I'm cautioning you from is to think that OKRs are somehow an add-on or inclusive of Agile. I would say no.
To add more color on this, just to kind of give you an example of where the connection lies. So remember how we talked about outcome-based thinking and action? When you're writing your user stories and you are outcome-based, you start to think about the targeted outcomes in the relation to that build that you're having. So depending on how big a user story is or a feature, there's that connection to what is the outcome and that is driving to those key results to the OKR. So it's a understanding how they all relate to each other in an ecosystem. But the OKRs down at that level, to Larry's point, it's more about understanding the outcomes of everything you do.
Okay, the next piece, thank you, Veronica, for that and the questions as well. The next piece that you're looking at here is called the OKR cycle. Okay, the OKR cycle is non-standard in the OKR framework, meaning you'll see variations of a 3-step OKR cycle, 4-step OKR cycle. We have a 5-step OKR cycle, which I'm going to walk through here, but the cycle is what you're adopting. That's the change in behaviors that is going to make it so that we created an environment that achieves the objectives that we set, right? So think back to any time you've ever been asked as part of, maybe an annual review process or performance management process, and they say, do SMART goals, right? We do SMART goals, we tuck them away, we set them, we forget them, and then the end of the year comes off, we bring them out, we look at them, right? The same fate, similar fate can happen with OKRs. Okay, it's a common anti-pattern. And it's because we do it without an understanding of how to incorporate it into our work habits, okay? So let's talk about the OKR cycle for a second. The first thing it points to is the need to establish, in this context, enterprise clarity. But it can be at the line of business level, but we're trying to get the strategic clarity where it affects like a product line in an organization or the entire organization, right? That's what we're trying to do is provide that clarity for the people that support that line of business or that product, or in a, if the smaller company, it could be the whole company. So that's what we start with, context. Then we get into the next phase where we have teams do 2 things that we call co-create OKRs and localize. What does that mean? When we are crafting our OKRs as a team, okay, this could be a leadership team, it could be a IT management team, whatever team. It could also be a product team, okay, or it could be an agile release train, potentially team of teams. The co-creation is when we're collaborating across teams to align on our goals, right? What are you guys doing? What are we doing? How can we work together? Think about sales, marketing, IT. All of them have pieces and parts that could go to the same strategy if we wanted, right? So they want to co-create. And then localize is to do the creation of the OKRs as a team. We don't want to do it as the manager brings the OKRs to the team and says, here's our OKRs for the next quarter. That wouldn't be the way to do it, because authorship drives ownership, and we want the team to work together to create their OKRs that they're trying to achieve. So that's a big piece to it. The other piece is action plans. What are the things we need to set into motion so that we can start to define work to deliver on our goals? And then you get into some new rhythms for doing check-ins, like weekly huddles, if that works for you. Some way of keeping our eye on our objectives and ensuring that the work we're doing stays aligned with our objectives. That's one of the risky things that happens is we'll set our OKRs, and because we're not continuing to reinforce them, we'll see a drift happen, and the work that we're doing will start to drift further and further away from the goals that we're trying to set. So we have to keep coming back and making sure that the work we're doing aligns to the goals that we have. And that's really why it's important that the top of the house, if you will, establish a set of OKRs. Then they have kind of skin in the game for what the tactical OKRs are going to be that are going to deliver on the company's strategy. Okay. And then the final step to round out that PDCA cycle that I mentioned is to calibrate. At the end of a quarter, you review your OKR and your outcomes that you're achieving, right? And you score your OKRs and you calibrate them. What adjustments do we have to make? What did we just experience in this prior quarter? And what adjustments do we have to make to our OKRs for the next quarter? And so that's the cycle that you want to get into. Now, I will tell you, when we're putting this in place, our recommendation is to start with 2 levels of OKRs, a strategy level and a tactical level, something that delivers the strategy. And then the strategic OKRs might be annual in nature, but the tactical ones will always be quarterly. Okay. There's where you can start to see some synergies between Agile and OKRs. Like, for example, if you happen to be working in the scaled Agile framework, you might be doing PI planning, which is something along the lines of a quarter, might be a little shorter, but you could align an OKR cycle to that and get your delivery and your outcome evaluation synced up so that we are ensuring that we're doing the right work. Okay. The real compliment to Agile, though, that's worth highlighting on this note, on this slide here is, if you do some research, I don't remember which member of the person that signed the Agile Manifesto. One particular person said that Agile is intentionally about the doing, not the choosing. That was a signer of or one of the authors of the Agile Manifesto, that Agile is about the doing, not the choosing. OKRs are about the choosing. So how many times have you been helping an organization or even part of your own organization where we adopt Agile, but we're still trying to do all the same amount of work in all the same ways? It's like the demand didn't change, only the way of working changed. That's really not the desired outcome that we're looking for. We're looking to get the demand in line with capacity and get the work that we're doing to be strategic and meaningful for our customers. What questions do you guys have or thoughts do you have that come to mind as it relates to learning about the OKR cycle?
I have a question, Larry. So could we say that in the scaled Agile framework, the PI objectives, I have seen where we've recommended for them to be written in OKR fashion. That might be a good example of how to implement that for the quarterly PI objectives.
Here's my feedback on that, Regina, because I get that all the time. And what I say is, if you think about what I was talking about when I said, if you use OKRs in the presence of real work, your OKRs often look like project plans to deliver that work. So with that in mind, there is a place for OKRs in PI planning, but it's the vision from the product manager. Remember, we're trying to influence work decisions, not encapsulate the story of the work decisions that have been made. So PI objectives represent what it is what we're saying we're going to achieve, but it's based on a plan that we've already put together. So there is a difference there. There's a subtle difference. The other thing I will tell you that is very, very real consideration in this is it can take time to write OKRs. And if we're trying to do it in PI planning when we're kind of already under pressure trying to get a lot of things done, we don't end up creating really well-formed OKRs. So my recommendation on that is, yes, it can be included. Use the OKRs as the product vision from the product manager to cast that vision and measure the outcomes. Does that make sense? Cool. What other questions do you guys have? That was a great question, by the way. Okay, so I'm gonna go to this slide. This is something for you to keep in mind. I was mentioning as it relates to the set it and forget it, right? These are the possible outcomes, if you will, of an OKR cycle. If the trajectory we want is something that looks like sustained weekly focus, where we've incorporated our work habits around the OKR cycle in support of well-defined objectives and key results. We make it part of our work habit, weekly updates around our objectives. We're driving our action plans and our work definition around our goals. And there's a high degree of transparency, everything that you can see on the screen there, versus down there at the set it and forget it. I actually had a client recently call me to fix that exact problem. In his words, we are suffering from set it and forget it. Help us. That's when there's no sustained focus and no action plans. And we really just kind of wrote OKRs and then went on with our normal work. Okay. That's OKRs that lack a vision, lack a purpose. We didn't drive it into the organization the right way. Okay. So what's the right way look like? So I'm going to go through a handful of slides that are going to touch on things for you to consider as it relates to really implementing them in your organization. The first one is put together a plan, a real plan. Think of it like change management, okay? We have a OKR, Scaled OKRs has an OKR coach course that we have to certify those that know how to implement and stand up an OKR program in an organization. Other companies call that same role like an OKR champion. But effectively, we want to build a team and we want to mobilize a team that's going to help to drive adoption in the organization. This may sound similar to a LACE or a Lean Agile Center of Excellence that we set up to adopt Agile, right? Now, I would often get a question from folks that are on a LACE that are driving change in an organization, and they say, could the LACE do the OKRs in the organization? I say, yeah, absolutely. Change agents are the champions of change, and we want them to be driving stuff like this because we're trying to achieve a certain outcome. We're not just trying to adopt a new process. Very different. Complement your team with a solid communication strategy. We're looking to change the way we work. Okay, we're doing it for a reason. Everybody wants to know why we're changing and what's in it for me. So we have to communicate. Okay, and then you have to offer training. You guys are getting a real light touch. Those of you that have been working for a while might appreciate that it's hard to write OKRs. It's hard to manage to OKRs. It's particularly hard when there's a lot of competing demands in the organization. So I like to say OKRs take discipline, organizational discipline, like any other thing that we try to do and get good at, okay? And then you get into your OKR cycle, and then you come out of your OKR cycle and you calibrate, and then that becomes a way of working that's intended to become a new pattern of working into perpetuity, okay? So this would be your implementation plan. We've got a couple different variations of an implementation plan depending on what your needs are in terms of complexity of implementation. I'll give you an example at the end on the last slide of what a complex implementation would look like. So when you build the team, keep in mind, you want to have executive sponsorship and leadership like anything else. The organization needs to see that leadership's on board, leadership's involved. And you need somebody who is going to be the champion of the OKRs in your organization. If it's attempted to do in the absence of that, people don't know where to go for questions and things like that. They just know that they're being told to do OKRs, and you end up with a lot of people that are like, you'll have a situation where everybody's doing OKRs, sure, but they're not connected. There's no horizontal and vertical alignment. We just said do OKRs, so everybody did them, much like SMART goals, and they're not intended to be like that. So you need to have some key roles. And then this is your communication strategy. This is to communicate like John Kotter would encourage communication. John Kotter is our change guru, right? Communicate 10 to 100x. So what I'm hinting at here, for those of you who are thinking of it, it's a real change management effort, a real change management effort. And so you need to reinforce that. You should plan a cadence. This is an example of what it might look like over the course of a initial OKR cycle, 1 quarter. This might be what it looks like. And then see where it goes from there. 3 more slides. Now, the whole idea of using OKRs is to create that interconnection, right? So the vertical and horizontal alignment is really what creates that environment of shared goals and of common goals and shared commitments, is when we are all working toward the same set of goals, okay? So vertical and horizontal alignment are important concepts to understand as it relates to this. And then the other thing to understand is you don't need, you know, like as a consultant in the OKR space, you would think I would jump on the opportunity to have literally everybody in the organization writing OKRs, because it takes more time, right? It's more to coach, it's more to do. But if you're somebody who like is looking for the right answer for the client, you're looking to steer that client in the right direction, I tell them really, you know, like I depending on the organization and the complexity of it, really 2 levels is good if you can get strategy and tactics. It's just, where do the tactics happen? You want the tactics to happen at that level where people are coming up with the solution. What are we going to do? What are we going to build? Those people who are asking those types of questions are the ones that need to shape their direction with OKRs that complement the strategic OKRs. Okay. So you start at either of those 2 levels, company level and line of business, or line of business down to kind of department level. There's nothing stopping you from going further. Okay. Like, you know, other frameworks, they're directional. Okay. They're more of a map than a GPS. Okay. So there's no hard rules that will prevent you. All of it's guidance. So you could go further down. It's just, does it make sense? The further down you go, the closer to things start to feel like they contribute to performance management. And one rule in the OKR framework that is probably one of the most consistently followed rules out of anybody who's positioning themselves as somebody in the OKR space is, do not commingle OKRs with performance and like incentives like that. And that goes to the intrinsic versus extrinsic motivators. You could write that down and look into that a little bit. We're looking to get intrinsic motivation from OKRs, that drive, right? That's why I say we're trying to create a hierarchy of purpose when we create vertical and horizontally aligned OKRs in an organization. So they're a real catalyst to change. Last slide here. So if you were to ask, like, what the heck is scaled OKRs? What I wouldn't want you to do is think that scaled OKRs is somehow like an enhancement, if you will, to the framework, because it's not. There's influence in it for sure. But what we understand from a scaled OKRs perspective is how to install in a large organization and how to scale that. So first of all, the thing to note here, so for those of you who are Agilists, and which most of all of you are, and are in the working with scaled Agile, for example, you might approach an organization from an implementation perspective of OKRs and think that there's no way to do it other than vertical. You have to do vertical lines of business. You would get a lot of people who would agree with you, okay, that you got to install things like frameworks vertically. OKRs violate that rule a little bit because they can achieve a substantial gain for the organization, even if they're installed horizontally. Let me explain what I mean by that. Let's say we're an organization who recognizes that we need more rigor and clarity around how we capture or communicate our strategy. That's, and we just say we got to get that right. And we believe if we get that right, then we can use clarity at that level, that strategy level, to start to, inform what work we should do. So with OKRs, we could go to all the lines of business in an organization and start there. Say, all of you are going to start at these lines of business, P&L owners maybe. You're going to do your OKRs to shape and inform your ability to make decisions about what work's going to flow down into your organization. So there's a huge gain with OKRs, unlike Agile. Like it's hard to do a horizontal implementation of Agile. When we do that, we usually start with just teams, and we know that that's mixed results pretty much. So with OKRs, it's possible. With Agile, it's not as possible. But in either case, whether you do horizontal or vertical, you need to be strategically informed about what it is going to be that we're going to be doing. And so you need that strategy influence. And then the last thing, as it relates to scaling, is you can start in, you want to start with a pilot, whether it's horizontal or vertical, however it looks, but then you prove out what patterns of implementation are working for our organization, for not just the adoption of OKRs, but the implementation of the OKR cycle. What patterns work? And then carry those patterns through your organization in a methodical way, like you would do with Scaled Agile Framework. Okay, so that's it. I know I threw a ton at you in a short period of time. We're gonna stick around for questions. I do want to kind of summarize though a little bit, right? So OKRs are intended to drive purpose into organizations by way of aspirational outcomes that are measurable. That's the key thing, right? The OKR cycle is what brings rigor and discipline and changes our work habits to work with OKRs in the organization. Okay. There's some challenges that we're trying to overcome as it relates to alignment, as it relates to clarity and focus, and being able to take on the right amount of work relative to our capacity. And then we looked at an implementation plan, and then we talked about ways of creating interconnection horizontally and vertically with your OKRs. We touched on a few questions about SAFe and things of that nature and connecting with Agile. It scratched the surface. We have a 1-day course for OKR facilitators and a 2-day course for OKR coaches that teach everything to do with a full implementation of what we call an OKR program, meaning a function, an entity in the organization that helps to sustain the successful use of OKRs for the organization over the long haul. That's the goal. Thank you.
Larry, so let me ask you a question.
Yeah.
What is the biggest cultural change that someone has to go into to absorb an OKR, mindset? What would you say that they have to absorb?
Being able to express an outcome-centric objective statement.
Okay.
Being able to switch from outcomes to outputs. People will struggle mightily.
I actually have a couple of questions for Larry, but we also have a promotion for the course. And so Neilu, we wanted you to kind of bring that up if you don't mind, and we're going to put the link in the chat. So Larry, when is your training coming up? When is your training coming up?
The very next training we have is March 10th and 11th. It's a Thursday and Friday, March 10th and 11th. Still spots available.
And this is the Scaled OKR Certified Coach Training, correct?
Mm-hmm. That's right. Yep.
And who's the perfect audience for this? Who's the perfect audience for this?
Perfect audience for this would be, it's going to be people that are product leaders. I think if you're in a leadership role in an organization that affects strategy, they're a good candidate for this. Change agents that are helping organizations in any way that they could add to their capabilities, they're a good person for this. Veronica, what am I missing? Who else would you recommend?
I know, I just did our list.
Yeah.
So anybody that's in transformation, so Larry hit it hard on organizational change, anything on change management, any kind of transformation. So you could be doing business transformation, agile transformation, digital transformation, you name it. Anybody that works in executive coaching, working in leadership, that will also, anybody that's in charge of a PMO.
Yeah.
PMO is big. I don't know if any of you are aware of PMI talking about OKRs that are in the universe. So the PMO offices, that's a also an area of where people probably should be coming as well. I would say anybody, he talked about in product. So if you have delivery leads, anybody that's going to be helping in a strategic or tactical, what he described, we still need coaches at every level. And if you have an understanding how to actually bring this out, right? Think of you all that are in agile transformations. You have to think of all the layers, right? The system. And so anybody that's working to help bring a system along to work together, this is going to be a course that's going to help with everyone, because it's key when it comes to connecting the strategy across your organization.
Right, awesome. So we're super excited to partner with Larry. We've got the link for the registration for you guys in the on the chat. Copy the link, share it also with your friends, guys. If you want, post it on LinkedIn. I found this class, I mean, it's not a class yet because we haven't attended the class, but just your introduction to the topic, very interesting. Cool. I'll tell you, when we do organizational assessments, one of the main questions that we ask at all different levels is, what is your knowledge and understanding of your organization's strategic goals and objectives? And we get blank stares. They can't say them. So when you said that hit a note with me, because we see that across the board. And then the other thing is, when we're teaching OKRs, they always want us to share examples. Yeah. Because they don't know how to write them. Yeah. So that was the other thing that I was going to ask you, if you had examples for the folks to see what a good OKR would look like. That would be a good thing also to share.
Give me 10 seconds and I will show you guys an example of one that I use when I do team workshops to sort of introduce this idea. So let me show you guys.
Well, you look to that, for any of you that work with product owners, product managers, or that you deal with leaders in any sort of fashion in your existing roles, this is a great conversation to have. Okay? Huge. Like challenge them and ask them, hey, where are your organizational goals and objectives? Where are your key results? Do you have that? Bring them and share them with the team. So let's say you're in an agile team, regardless of your role, whether you're a scrum master or a developer, go and challenge your product owner to bring in the OKRs of their organizational area so that you understand what we're working towards. And if they don't have them, right, they can go check with their product managers, et cetera, just depending on the titles. And the titles really don't matter. It's the leaders in that area that you guys are helping implement whatever it is that we're implementing. It's a great conversation starter and say, hey, wouldn't it be great, right? You know, to challenge them and say, if you share that with us, it'll help us understand a little bit of like what our North Star, where we're working, and how is it aligning to the strategic goals and objectives at the enterprise level.
Yeah, I love where you're going, Regina, and I'll just kind of add into, so a lot of what we know is the early adopters are on the business side. And so you'll see a lot of product and marketing areas because they hit really close to the customer experience, right? Either the buyer journey or actual customer physical journeys. And so they are always trying to come up with strategies, but here's the thing, they have to think of how they're hitting the mark, right? And so part of what happens a lot out there is, are they focusing on the right things, and are they measuring the right things so they know they're actually driving the business results? And so those two areas in the business, we know based on what the statistics out there, they are the early adopters for obvious reasons. And so those of you that are close to the product and marketing, what Regina is saying, they are great people to approach. It is, most of them probably have read it somewhere about outcomes. I can tell you that right now. And so it's a great start. Now, also, here's a juicy thing. If anybody is trying to connect more alignment between the business and the IT house, right? We never have this problem ever, 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 right? It doesn't exist. This is where that connection can truly happen, that everyone is focusing on the right things. And we're starting to actually measure the right things as well. We know in Agile, we're really good at performance metrics, but what about the things that are actually driving the business results? How many of you ever feel disconnected with that?
Yeah. I'll show you that example real quick that I use when I teach this, when I do a workshop, a team workshop. So let me shrink this side real quick so you can't read that part. Sorry, let me go back. So, oops, where did it go? Okay, so I tee this up with the people in the workshop, and I say, let's look at an example OKR for today's workshop, right? And I say, okay, so the objective is learn about OKRs and create team OKRs for Q4. And then we say key results, understand what OKRs are and how to create them, complete the team OKR workshop, create Q4 OKRs, get management sign off. And I ask them, how inspired are you by that? This is not a good OKR, guys. This is a trick question. I'm giving you guys a kind of a trick, right? This is a lousy OKR. This is all about outputs, right? This is all about finish the class, check, complete the OKRs, check, get management sign off, check, output, output, output. Let's look at outcomes. This is outcome thinking. Same exact scenario. People in a class learning about OKRs. What's the objective? We will deliver our highest performing quarter ever by achieving a set of clearly defined goals. This is using OKRs to adopt OKRs. The key results, all teams have 3 to 5 clearly defined OKRs. All teams attend 100% of their weekly check-ins throughout the quarter. All teams monitor OKR progress and escalate immediately if OKRs are at risk. And the last one, all teams achieve at least a 0.7. You'd have to know a little bit about scoring, a 0.7 for aspirational OKRs. So these OKRs were built to represent the same thing. We took an OKR class. You see the very different way of driving toward the purpose of taking that class. This basically says complete the class. This says change the way we're doing things, become a new team that's purpose driven, right? This is a better OKR. Now, this is very contextualized to a workshop, okay? But the same thing would be true for an organization. Aspiration, right? We're creating aspirational goals.
Hey, Larry, they might be thinking this, but if not, I'm seeding this thought is, what happens if we don't have the right things available to measure? What do we do?
Good question. There's a number of things that we do. What we don't do is just start throwing random dates on things to make them quantifiable. But there are baselines that you can establish. So if you don't truly have a measure, we're trying to, let's say we want to grow into a certain market segment that we're brand new in. Our first one might be to establish a baseline for how much penetration can we get into that market. And then future OKR cycles would build upon that baseline metric. But you got to know where your data is coming from as it relates to your key results. Otherwise, you're going to get to the end and ask, how are we going to actually measure that we moved the needle by 20% or 40% or whatever it was? So,
do you use this? Do you use the SWOT at all to kind of come up with strategy?
Yeah, SWOT's good, and the TOES is a good complement to SWOT if you're familiar with the two of those. The strategy map that's based on the balanced scorecard, another place to get divergent thinking across a spectrum of business, priorities. Yeah, for sure.
Awesome. All right, guys. This does not mean that Larry's not coming back. He is. Like we always.
I'll be back.
No. You're stuck here. Just be aware. This is like you can't get out, right? So we
got
will
it, I
have
got
access
it.
to him. We will make sure that he comes in and at least every few months. We will make sure he gets in here. But thank you, Larry. Great job. We
My
really
pleasure.
appreciate it.
My
So for
pleasure.
the last word of the day, before we say goodbye to everyone, give us one last word.
One last word. Purpose.